I study physical science in my free time, and when I checked the comments on the first video that came up with a female host, I found several comments like this: "Not the best eye candy." That kind of comment may not be intended as domineering, but it is a reminder to the receiver that their power is limited by their social roles. Power dynamics shape interaction between men and women. Men are often socialized to be powerful, commanding both space and interaction, while women are more often taught to be submissive, taking up as little space as possible and avoiding being seen as too aggressive. One subtle submission is that traditional cultural roles have women give up their family name when they get married. Even if no sexism is intended, simply by acting out learned social roles, men often end up interrupting, talking over, and intimidating women. Often, men express their power in ways intended to be quite positive, such as offering to pay or carry heavy objects. While some women may welcome this, others find that such cultural norms are often assumed for them or even forced upon them when they'd prefer to retain their own power and independence. Men who do not perform as powerful also may be dominated, while women may find that the only way to be accepted or compete in groups of men is to conform to their aggressive roles. Men and women both may be seen as deviant if they don't perform their respective social roles. For both men and women, sexual assault can sometimes be used as a punishment for such deviance. If you wonder why women don't go into male-dominated jobs, fear of sexual violence has to be taken into account. For instance, during the recent military occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan, it was discovered that some female soldiers were dying of dehydration, not drinking water before going to bed because of frequent assaults from their fellow male soldiers on the way to the toilets at night. That threat limits women's freedom in many other situations as well. The perpetrators of sexual violence, whether male or female, may feel powerful by victimizing others. The problem is increased by cultural factors and the way we label sexual deviance. While relatively few men would call themselves rapists, many more will admit to forcible sexual acts if the word rape isn't used. The essential difference between healthy sex and sexual assault is a mutually informed consent, not violently fighting off an equally violent attacker. While the stereotypical image of a sexual predator is a stranger jumping out of the bushes, most victims actually know their attackers, often quite well. Sexual violence is sometimes glorified or eroticized in the media, but recent references to rape culture tend to refer more to the way attackers are often excused for their actions, while victims are interrogated and blamed for somehow asking for it. While male anatomy increases the chances of physical injury, disease, and unwanted pregnancy when they carry out sexual violence, men can be victims, too. Male victims of sexual or domestic violence may be taken even less seriously than women and face blame or even have their very manhood questioned. In fact, male gender roles cause many problems for men. In addition to common expectations of financial success and support, they are often expected to be tough and hide their emotions, and are socialized towards action rather than communication. This can leave some men with difficulty communicating, and is probably one of the major reasons that men make up the vast majority of both suicides and homicide victims. All of this is why third-wave feminists say that just changing the laws isn't enough to fully open up our opportunities. They're sometimes called radical feminists because they believe that we have to address the root of the problem. Radical comes from the word root, and they say that all of the problems and inequalities of gender grow from the way that our society uses biological sex to create an ascribed status that shapes stereotypes, role models, socialization, and opportunities. It's not that men should be in women's roles and that women should be in men's roles, but that all of these important social roles should be valued, and that each individual should be able to decide what's best for them. Part of the backlash against recent social changes has been relabeling of feminists as feminazis who think all men are evil, but that belief would just be sexism. What radical feminism does say is that it's not just up to women to work past historical patriarchy and internalize gender limitations. Men, too, need to recognize their part of the system and change their behavior and speak out against sexism and sexual violence. One key aspect of this idea is that we need to recognize the socially constructed nature of gender roles. Most people are born male or female, and there are some biological differences that come from sex, but even these are amplified greatly by cultural roles. For instance, human males, on average, have more upper body mass than females, but based on this assumption, boys are more often encouraged to go into muscle-building activities, while strong women may be seen as unusually masculine. Other roles, such as what we wear, have little or no basis in biology. Cultural roles include everything from what pronoun is used, he or she, to what romantic partner is assumed. For those who don't feel like they fit into the ascribed status, either major roles or overall identity, social pressures can make role strain and conflict major stresses. One way to decrease prejudice is relabeling, so that rather than normal and deviant, we simply have different labels to describe different ways. So, for example, a female woman is cisgendered, or a cis woman, while a female man is transgendered, or a trans man. Attraction to the same sex is homosexual, homo meaning same. Attraction to the opposite sex is heterosexual, hetero meaning different. Attraction to both sexes is bisexual, bi meaning two, and no sexual attraction to anyone, which itself can be a cause of prejudice and discrimination, is asexual. We are a multicultural society with many individual differences, and that often makes talking about these issues difficult. No group has the monopoly on prejudice and discrimination, and people find excuses within each value system for their prejudice. I am no exception. The best we can do as social scientists to adopt an objective ethic is to focus on the suffering or happiness that comes from an action. The golden rule of most philosophies is to treat other people in ways that you know would bring happiness, and rather than suffering, to yourself. But since you may react differently than others to the same situation, a good starting place may be to treat others the way they want to be treated, and, like ensuring consent before a sexual act, if you don't know for sure, ask. Discrimination causes suffering for many people who deviate from any number of gender roles. Homophobia is prejudice and discrimination against those who are attracted to or have romantic relationships with others of the same sex. While this has decreased significantly in the last generation, 1 out of 4 people would still refuse to vote for a gay person, no matter how qualified, for president. These prejudices are often caused by belief in stereotypes. To get past them, try to use Verstehen, understanding another's perspective, to get a more objective view. If you are heterosexual, turning on yourself the same questions people might ask a gay person. How do you know you're straight? Have you ever tried being with someone of the same sex? Or even, if you're a man who's attracted to women, how can we trust you around little girls? One common prejudice is the idea that if you are attracted to the same sex, you must fit in the gender roles of the opposite sex. But gender identity is a separate issue, and those who don't feel they fit into their ascribed gender status, regardless of their sexual preference, often face transphobia for deviating from assumed gender roles. Even for those whose gender identity generally matches their biological sex, they may face discrimination for deviating from specific gender roles. While gender roles for men and women have opened up somewhat and non-traditional gender identity has entered the public consciousness, a discriminatory backlash has led in recent years to higher rates of homophobic and transphobic hate crimes than against any racial or ethnic group. The gay rights and larger LGBT movements work against this, just as feminism works against sexism. Those who do not experience discrimination themselves are often allies in these social movements, just as they are in racial and ethnic minority movements. There are many controversies and disagreements within and between these group efforts, including the question of whether the focus on gender identity itself reinforces the idea that gender status, regardless of sex, should determine a person's social roles. Similarly, some have questioned whether the public focus on race may actually help reinforce racial stereotypes and cultural segregation, and these will be the topics of the next lesson.